Mac Power Users, episode 564, Taking Pictures and Enriching Lives with Austin Mann. Hello and welcome back to Mac Power Users. My name is Stephen Hackett, and I'm joined as always by my co-host and friend, Mr. David Sparks. David, how are you?
I'm doing great, Mr. Hackett.
It's another week, and we have a really special MPU today for everybody.
Yes, we do. I've really been looking forward to having this guest on the show. Welcome back, Austin Mann.
Hey, David, Stephen, so great to be here.
I was looking in Skype, and it's been 3 years since we had Austin on. It was the iPhone 10. For those of you who don't know Austin, he's the person who I am most jealous of because he goes all over the world and all over the United States and takes amazing photographs and does a lot of other cool stuff. But every year, Austin does an iPhone camera review, and they're just amazing. I think the whole community is waiting to see where you go every year. I think that's just as fun as the cameras, where Austin's going to go. But he puts these iPhone cameras under, kind of the ultimate stress test, whether he's climbing a mountain or hiking up a lake, and has a lot of great insight on how to use the camera. So today, Austin agreed to come back on the show. We're going to talk about the new iPhone 12 Pro cameras, but we're also going to be talking about just iPhone photography and mobile photography in general. So I'm really looking forward to sharing this one with the audience.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to being here. There's a lot to talk about this year.
Yeah, well, I mean, the phones have changed a lot in the 3 years since you've been on, and I went back and looked at some of your prior years, and you always do a great job, but the images you're getting out of the latest iPhones they look to me like an SLR camera. And I know I'm not a professional, but they've come so far.
Yeah, one of the biggest kind of gaps between any smartphone and a DSLR or a larger pro camera has traditionally been the low light performance, and particularly with the iPhone, we've seen such a huge jump in low light performance that now you're starting to see pictures. And I think it was last year when night mode came out, it was the first time in a long time that I looked at my screen and I said, wow, I can't believe I shot this with my iPhone. And and it had been a while, since I had really been that kind of set back, because we've come to know that the iPhone camera is so strong that we're starting to expect it to be great. But there's been some substantial jumps in the last year.
Listeners will know that I have broken a fair share of iPhones. The number is not important, but the number is high. And I love your reviews too. I think everybody who has seen them does, but I always get nervous because like you're hanging off like the side of a cliff, you're taking a picture of something. I was like, it's a brand new iPhone on the edge of a cliff. I would drop it. So I guess props to you for not being that guy.
Well, I do take precautions. Anytime I'm in any sort of risky situation, I'm always finding a way to tether it to me. First of all, always taking my personal safety at the utmost highest and taking all the precautions necessary. And then secondly, making sure I have some sort of lanyard or something that's tethered to me in the unlikely event that I do drop it, that it doesn't just end up at the bottom of a cliff somewhere.
It's like, well, that one's gone.
Old sailors used to say, one hand for the ship, one hand for the man. I feel like now it's one hand for the man, one hand for the phone.
Yeah. I've been known to, way back when I first started doing the pre-release reviews in 2014, I was a part of a night vision training mission with the Icelandic Coast Guard, and I was hoisted outside of the helicopter, and that one was particularly risky. So I actually used gaff tape to just gaff tape my entire phone rig to my hand. Like even if I didn't hold on, it was permanently fixed to my hand. It took me like 10 minutes to get it off.
Have you ever sent one of those sample phones back to Apple as a bag of parts?
I haven't. I've proudly. Maybe one of them had been dropped, but in general, I feel like we've been fortunate that we haven't had any major major snafus or damage to any of those review phones.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's an awkward phone call with PR, I bet. It's like, hey. So before we dig into the iPhone cameras, and there's a lot to talk about today, maybe for people who aren't super familiar with you, give us a little bit of your background and how you kind of ended up in the place you are now.
Yeah, well, I'll try to keep that short. But I've grown up kind of in the Mac and Apple community. My dad has been working on Apple computers since '84, and so I grew up on it and was always passionate. And bought my first iMac in 1998 when I was in 7th grade. Mowed lawns all summer long to buy the iMac the Bondi
Awesome.
Blue when it first came out, and so then started designing websites and became really passionate about digital imaging and web development, and particularly interactive web development in Flash. And so went to college pursuing that. And then actually 15 years ago from this month, had a pretty major 180 in my life, and was just kind of going in one direction and changed directions, and started following Jesus. And that was part of my story that got me into photography, and became really fascinated by light and its power over darkness, and in the spiritual sense, in the physical sense, and scientifically as a photographer, became a real passion for me. And then so I started pursuing that, and then from there just began traveling a little bit more, and had never been out of the country before that. And that following year ended up on a trip to Tanzania in East Africa, and took some shots, and loved my time there, learned so much from the people there, and learned also that I just loved traveling and shooting. And so I began pursuing a career in photography, and started shooting a ton. And then I guess it was 2012, I remember seeing some of the iPhone reviews come out, and they had just come out with panorama mode. And I saw these panos and kind of the reviews, and everyone had written perfectly great reviews, but I wasn't finding any results from the panorama mode on the iPhone that was really artistic or inspiring. It was very, very. What I saw in general was pretty technical, and so I was really curious. What can if this thing really can shoot panoramas? What can it really do? What can we create with it? And so I bought an iPhone the day it came out in 2012, and flew to Iceland and shot. I had another project to shoot, so shot that, and then on the side, me and my good friend Jordan Bellamy created a little video of just testing iPhone panorama mode in Iceland, and that we shared it. I had a friend, good friend over at Engadget, Darren Murph, who graciously drove some traffic towards that review, and that kind of gained some traction towards this whole iPhone camera review thing. And then the next year it was in Patagonia, and then the next year did my first pre-release review back in Iceland, and have been doing it ever since. And so I always love, for me, I define my life calling as to explore and illuminate the beauty of creation, and to challenge, inspire, and enable others to do the same. And I see the latter part of that calling as my photography itself, and I see, the former part of that calling, the beginning, as my photography itself, and the latter part of that calling is where my reviews come in. It's to hopefully inspire people to what is possible with the camera in their pocket, and enable them by giving them the knowledge, and just kind of showing them how to make the most out of this really powerful camera. And I hope that my reviews do that for my readers, and I hope that just this podcast today will inspire and challenge you, and hopefully help you make the most of the power of the camera in your pocket.
Well, inspire is the right word, because like when you look at an iPhone review I write, there's like a picture of my dog. But for you, it literally, it's amazing. In fact, one of the places you went for the iPhone, I believe it was the 12 Pro Max, you went to Zion National Park here in the United States. And my sister and I have been talking about walking the Narrows. And people who aren't familiar with it, there's this basically a river that runs through these steep carved canyons, and I think they call them the Narrows, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, the Narrows.
Well, we've been talking about that for 30 years. And I sent her your review and said, okay, you and I are going to do this. And we're both kind of dealing with things right now. But once we kind of get through it and the pandemic's over, the two of us are going to go walk the Narrows. You inspired us. But so, I mean, not only do you inspire people, I think, to take great pictures, you also make us want to get on the road and go to these places.
Well, good. I hope you do. And I learned a lot. So whenever you do start planning that trip, feel free to ping me. I'll give you the insights. We had to jump through quite a few hoops to make it happen, but it was totally worth it, and just an absolutely stunning hike. It was a great way to test the 12 Pro Max, and yeah, don't skip the Zion trip. It's a really special one.
Yeah, I mean, from where I live, I could drive there in a day. It's not like it's that far away.
Yeah, it's one of those. I think a lot of people have it on their bucket list, and rightfully so. And so I would, yeah, it's like 7 or 8 hours from where you are.
Yeah. So you did though look at this year both the iPhone 12 Pro. You went to Glacier National Park, and you looked at the iPhone 12 Pro Max at Zion. And then we're going to put in the show notes the links to the reviews. And I'd recommend, if you're in front of a computer, to open up the reviews as we're walking through the podcast, because some portion of this podcast really is going to be the director's cut of those reviews. We've got a bunch of questions about some of the pictures and how he did that with an iPhone.
Yeah, this year's been super. Everything has been different this year, right? And so most of the time I'm going international for these projects, because a lot of times I'm kind of aligning these reviews with other projects I'm shooting, which are most of the time it's taking me out of the country. But this year we decided to stick a little closer to home, and it's been fun to explore America the Beautiful a little bit more, and yeah, kind of tick off these things that have been on my own list, like the Narrows, and of course Glacier is a very special place to me and my wife, and so it was fun to spend time out there too. It's a beautiful place and a great place to test these cameras.
Yeah, and you and your wife have been, through the pandemic, traveling around the United States in your Airstream and visiting some of these places. We're going to cover that in the More Power Users episode today, some of the technology you use, Airstreaming across the country. But I think the reason we're here today is to talk about cameras, so let's do that right after this. This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by TextExpander. Go to textexpander.com/podcast to learn more and get 20% off. TextExpander is the text expansion app to rule them all. With TextExpander, not only can you make your text expansion really powerful, you can also use it with your team to get the right words in every situation. Whether you need to keep legal happy or delight customers with effective answers, you can rest easy knowing your team has it covered. The latest version of TextExpander even has new and improved statistics reporting for organizations, including the ability to build reports and customizable date ranges for enterprise and individuals, so you can track how much time your team saves. With TextExpander, you can keep your team consistent, accurate, and current. You can also share your text and images with the whole staff to keep them on track. Everyone will share the same message and give the same answers to customer questions. I use TextExpander every day, and it helps me work faster and smarter. TextExpander's powerful shortcuts and abbreviations allow me to streamline and speed up everything I type. You can also create powerful snippets to save you time, so that all you type is the abbreviation and TextExpander does the rest of the typing for you. You can keep your whole team communicating efficiently with consistent language. TextExpander is available on the Mac, Windows, Chrome, iPhone, and iPad. They cover all the platforms, and they do it brilliantly. So if you're using a Mac at home and a PC at work, TextExpander has you covered. And best of all, show listeners get 20% off the first year. To do so, just go to textexpander.com/podcast to learn more about TextExpander. I've been a big user of this app since the beginning. They were the original sponsor of the show. We always appreciate that, but I just use the app every day, and you should too. So once again, go to textexpander.com/podcast to get that 20% off and start saving time today. Thanks, TextExpander.
So this year is a little bit like previous years, several years ago, where Apple has made a distinction between the regular sized phone and the larger phone in terms of camera capability. I think we first saw that with the 7, and then with the 10 and the 11, they were kind of all the same again, and now it's different again. So Apple's kind of changed this over time. So let's tackle these one by one, like you did in your reviews, because they are different and I think in some surprising ways. So let's start with the iPhone 12 Pro. What is new this year with that camera system? Did Apple make big hardware changes on the regular 12 Pro?
There were some hardware changes. They upgraded the wide lens to a new 7-element lens, and it's slightly faster than it was before, meaning the aperture can open up a little bit wider, and it can let more light in than the previous than last year's wide lens. And when I refer to wide lens, I mean the normal 1x, but really the 12 Pro upgrade was really focused on software, and this is where we just really got to see what the software team at Apple has been working on and see it really shine. Things like night mode on the ultra wide were huge upgrades, and so it was really cool to see just the improvement in overall image creation capacity on the 12 Pro with really purely almost exclusively in software. And the story on the 12 Pro Max, of course, which we'll get to, is more about hardware.
Yeah, the computational photography thing is where Apple has really put the gas down. And it kind of makes sense because you've got this camera with, what is it, like basically a quarter of an inch of depth. And, the laws of physics determine exactly how much lens you can put with that much space. But if you can improve it on the compute side, well, with these A14 chips, they've got a lot of compute power to spare. And every year you go to the WWDC or to the iPhone announcement, and they announce this ridiculous number of computations that are done on every image that you take through the device. And that's where the heavy lifting is being done now.
Yeah, it's really incredible to experience all of that crazy technology being pointed towards a better user experience and a magical. It's almost magical. It's like beyond belief how well this thing can create images, and that I think it's easy. We've come to expect so much of our iPhone cameras that it's easy to kind of get it not kind of lose the sense of awe of what it's actually doing. But at the end of the day, every user that picks it up takes a great photo, and that's really amazing. And in almost any lighting scenarios now, and like one of the things that's really blown my mind is just how the rules are different in a camera that relies so much on software. For example, if I were to take a 3 or 4 second exposure, let's say a 5-second exposure with my traditional Pro camera, it would be almost impossible to keep that image sharp hand holding it. It's very, very difficult to hold your camera for 5 seconds super still, and it's exposing one frame. And it would definitely be impossible to do that while driving in a moving car, right? Or like with any sort of bumps or anything like that. And the laws of physics and the laws that we're familiar with as photographers just don't allow you to do that. You just can't keep it sharp. Well, on the iPhone, you're dealing with a different set of laws and rules because of how the software is bridging the gaps. And basically, when you're shooting a night mode image, that's a 5-second exposure on your iPhone. It's not shooting just one long frame. Instead it's shooting multiple frames per second, and then it's auto aligning the ones that line up and are sharp. And so over a 5-second exposure, you might have, you'll have dozens and dozens of different frames, and the iPhone will throw out the ones that aren't good, where maybe you were shaking or bumping, and it'll stack all the ones that are lined up and that are sharp, and it delivers you a sharp image. Even if I see my hand is moving, I still get a sharp image. And that's just crazy. And it's hard to kind of wrap your mind around it. And so the more I always really encourage, when you get a new, especially for traditional photographers, when they get a new iPhone camera, to really go out and play with it a ton to understand where the limitations are and kind of how it works, because it thinks it has rules that are so much different than what we traditionally think of as photographers. And that's a lot of sometimes it can be a little daunting to understand, but once you've understood it, it can be really powerful for image creation.
Yeah, I just hung my Christmas lights on the house the other day, and my wife and I went out to look at them. And historically, I take the tripod out and I set up the tripod and take a picture every year of the lights. And this year I'm like, well, let's see if Austin's right, and I pull up my camera, shoot night mode, and I get like a perfect image standing there with my jiggly human body with a 3-second exposure. It's just crazy how solid that is.
It's really nuts.
I do want to kind of like set the lens conversation though, because it's really easy when you read Apple's stuff. They call the wide lens what I think of as the normal lens, the main lens, and then I think they call the other one the ultra wide.
Yep.
The actual wide lens is the ultra wide, and then do they call it the zoom lens is the zoom now, or what's the Apple term?
I think they call it telephoto.
Yeah. Okay. So I get them all wrong, but but the wide lens, or David's normal lens, is the one you really want to focus on for those night shots, right?
Yeah, your best performance is always going to be with the wide or normal or 1x lens. And so yeah, the widest lens, they call that the ultra wide, and that's a 13 millimeter equivalent. And then they've got the wide lens, the normal 1x, and that's a 26 millimeter. And then on the 12 Pro, they've got the what they call the telephoto, which is the 2x, and that's the equivalent of a 52 millimeter on the 12 Pro, and is the equivalent of a 65 millimeter on the 12 Pro Max.
What are some other good night mode tips for folks that are shooting with that wide lens?
Well, a couple of things. So yeah, just to reiterate what you said, first and foremost, you're going to always get your best night mode performance with the wide, the 1x, the normal lens. Now, the ultra wide also has night mode, but it still has some limitations compared to the wide in terms of its aperture and mainly its aperture. But you're always going to have the best performance on 1x. So if you're in a very low light situation, I always recommend 1x. Another thing that I hear from a lot of people is, they get these kind of weird glares and flares from light sources. And that's usually just because there's a fingerprint or some sort of smudge on their lens. So whenever I'm shooting at night, I always am extra sure to make sure my lens is extra clean. So I usually carry a lens cloth with me, but usually your t-shirt or just any other fabric around can help you clean it off. And that'll make sure you get rid of that kind of haze or that weird like glare flare. And then, yeah, I think, if you are hand holding a really long exposure, shooting several frames is always a good idea. You just get to compare. Sometimes you might shake a little bit more than others, or the iPhone might be able to capture a better image. So if I'm shooting a longer, several second exposure handheld, then I'll always shoot a handful of frames, and especially if the subject is moving. If you're shooting still life, it's one thing because it's just you moving. But if you're shooting your dog, you've got you moving and the dog moving. So shooting a couple of frames is a good idea. And what else? Sometimes I'll use a second, like my friend's iPhone or my wife's iPhone to light my subject. So you can use the flashlight, but I've actually found using the screen of another iPhone can be really great for creating portraits. So using the light emitting from a second iPhone screen, kind of holding that in my other hand to cast some light on the subject is fun to experiment with. And I really like shooting on a tripod too. So whether it's a tabletop tripod, I keep one with me all the time, or a larger tripod. And then when you do go into night mode, it will show you at the bottom of your screen. It'll show you auto when you turn on your night mode, or it may automatically turn on. But then if you slide that auto slider, that kind of time slider that's just above the on-screen shutter button. You see that you can adjust the time, and if you go all the way to the right, you'll hit max. And when you hit max in night mode, the iPhone starts making some different decisions around movement. When it's in automatic night mode, it's trying to, the iPhone is programmed to freeze any of the movement that it sees. And so let's say if your dog walks across, or let's say you're shooting some water and you wanted and it was low light, and you if you're hand holding that and it's just in auto mode, it's going to try to freeze the motion of the water and show you individual water drops. But if you're on a tripod and you go all the way over to max, you're telling your iPhone you want it to blur the motion in your frame. So instead of the iPhone attempting to freeze those water drops, it's going to instead prioritize blurring those water drops, and so to give you some motion. And that's how you get those kind of cool light painting shots that people do with flashlights, or those urban area traffic pictures that we see with the taillights and the headlights flying through the road, or the blurry water river scenes. So that the key to getting those is being on a tripod and setting your iPhone to night mode to max time.
In fact, my favorite photo in the 12 Pro review is your 30-second night mode exposure. And you can see not only the clouds, you can see the movement in the clouds, but that movement is also reflected on the surface of the water. And this photo was taken in night mode. I mean, you right above it, you couldn't see the blue or green colors with your naked eye. This photo seems like a miracle of modern science, and it's absolutely beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, I was really proud of that shot, and it was fun to see what this year's iPhone could do. And that's a really good example of what I was just explaining. So yeah, if you check out the 12 Pro review, you'll see those clouds. It's blurring the motion of those clouds over that 30 seconds, and that's because I was shooting in night mode, max time on a tripod. If I had shot it not in max, it would have like frozen a frame of those clouds, and they would have looked more like they would on any given day. And so that kind of long exposure look with the motion of the clouds, that kind of gives you that dreamy kind of surreal feel that you see in that shot.
Yeah, another thing I got out of your review, and you just mentioned it earlier, was the idea of an additional light source for night mode. And there's a portrait shot of your wife in there where you were talking about, you just held up, I guess, her iPhone or another iPhone with the white screen on it to, I think it was to your left, and then you shot a night mode. And so she has this additional light source on her face, which is a very dim light source at night, but it really changes the look of the image. And that's an idea that had never occurred to me before.
Yeah, I think, photography is fun because it's about experimenting and just trying new things. And so we were just trying, and especially in this kind of testing phase, you're trying to learn, like what works really well for this thing, and where are my limitations and what are its strengths. And so, yeah, playing with different light sources. I actually found that the flashlight was too strong. It was too bright because it was so dark out there, and it was just the flashlight on her phone was too much. So I actually had her iPhone screen at the lowest brightness to create that image, which is hard to believe because it looks like it's so bright. But over that longer exposure time, it builds up, and the iPhone does a good job of exposing it. And so, yeah, I love to play around. That's so much of the creative process is about experimentation, and that's one of the most fun parts of my job, is figuring out how to solve new challenges, whether they're logistic challenges of getting into the narrows, or logistic challenges of creating a specific image. And so yeah, it's a lot of fun to play with different light sources.
Now, it's somewhat related to shooting at night, and maybe with this portrait shot of your wife, how does the LiDAR sensor help out with that?
So the LiDAR is really about what is it? Light detection and ranging. Is that what it stands for?
Yeah, I think so.
And basically, your iPhone now sends out an invisible beam that is measuring the distance to objects up to, I think, maybe 16 feet or some distance like that in front of you, and it's using that light detection and ranging to to actually determine where to put the focus point for your camera. So one of the things that we've all experienced is trying to shoot photos with your iPhone in low light scenarios, and or actually really with any camera. And there's that kind of autofocus searching where you've got that moment right in front of you, and your camera's searching for autofocus, and you can't shoot a picture because your iPhone or because your camera, whether iPhone or not, just can't find the focus. And it at some point in all of our lives that has driven us nuts. And autofocus needs traditionally autofocus needs enough light and contrast to be able to pull tack sharp focus for the camera. And without it, it just can't focus. So now with LiDAR, we don't need that available light to pull focus. Instead, it's providing its own invisible light to create focus. So anyway, like in a shot like that with my wife, I had despite having almost no visible light, I never had any trouble at all pulling focus on her, which is pretty cool. So that works really well for any subject that you're working with, especially if it's like if you're trying to shoot your puppy or and it's something that's moving a lot. That can be extra helpful because it's just constantly keeping whatever subject that's in your frame in focus much better and much more efficiently than with traditional cameras. And I think I wrote in the review too, this is a really profound jump up in how our cameras work in autofocus. And I haven't seen, maybe it's there, but I haven't seen that technology in traditional mirrorless or DSLR cameras. And I'd love to, what we have seen is that little green light that shoots out of point and shoot cameras, or a red or green light, and that's a similar concept, but of course it's a lot more invasive. It's like blinding your subject and everyone can see it. So I'd love to see LiDAR implemented in mirrorless and DSLR cameras as well, but I think there's some software and some hardware that needs to be upgraded in order to see that happen.
It seems like every time Apple talks about LiDAR, that what they show you is like something like the Matrix, like it's trying to like capture your room for the Matrix. But what it's really, I think, really beneficial for everybody is camera improvements. I maybe it's just me, but I think portrait mode is easier now too, and I have to think that the LiDAR sensor is playing a role in that.
Yeah, I think portrait mode has traditionally needed more light for focus, and I think it's had a huge I know it's had a huge impact on that. The LiDAR has, and so this year it's much easier to get great photos of your loved ones and those around you in low light, especially portraits, thanks to LiDAR.
Mm-hmm. One big software change this year is Apple continues to work on and improve its smart HDR. I think in the beginning, for some of us, it felt a little too aggressive, but I've been really impressed with version 3 of it. How has your time with the HDR stuff been?
Yeah, it's always been kind of a trade-off with HDR. Like sometimes, again, going back to what we talked about earlier, sometimes you look at photos and you say, this is living by a different set of rules than a traditional camera. You take a photo in the narrows and you've got a picture that you've got these dark shadows at the bottom of the canyon, and you've got these bright white clouds being hit by the sun up above, and everything's perfectly exposed. A traditional camera really couldn't do that. Not that same way, especially rendered immediately perfectly. We have ways of doing that with traditional cameras and stacking multiple raw photos and things like that, but just out of the camera, it's just not something that we've seen. And of course, with film, it was even more limited in its dynamic range. So again, so sometimes it's just kind of blowing your mind on what it's actually doing and how much different and better it is than traditional image creation tools. And then other times, we've all seen the smart HDR kind of have that weird, like orangey, posterized look on people's skin, and these kind of effects that have looked kind of bizarre. And so I'm always looking for improvements in that. And I know the team has done quite a bit to improve that over the years. And I think it was last year they introduced what they called semantic rendering, which was where the iPhone's recognizing humans and like human faces when you take the picture, and it's applying different algorithms to the skin than it is maybe to like pink clouds or something like that. And so it's gotten quite a bit better. And there's still some times when I'm shooting things like red rock, like out in Zion, when the red rock is like lit by the last light of the day, and it's that kind of pinkish, red, orangish light on the red rock, and sometimes it looks a little bit unnatural. It's almost hard to articulate, but I think it's gotten substantially better. And I think there was a time there, I think it was with maybe the 10S, that I just like left it off. I just didn't I appreciated it for what it was, but it affected me too much in pictures of like family, and I just didn't want those skin tones to look off. So I would just leave Smart
Right.
HDR off. Now I leave
same.
it on all the time. And I think we're going to talk about RAW at some point today, but RAW also has a big impact on that.
Yeah, I have turned it on now too. I had the same experience. For me, for the longest time on the iPhone, HDR was a thing I used when I had a specific problem to solve with an image. So it was the exception, not the rule. And at this point, it's the rule. I just leave it turned on.
Yeah, I haven't seen any like results this year that have made made an image unusable, and that's, I think, where the tipping point is. Like, okay, well, maybe it doesn't always look perfect, but it generally looks great, and every once in a while it looks a little bit different or weird or off, but that's okay. That's tolerable for me. And then there's other places too that we've seen improvements. One of the things I wrote about a couple of years back was I love shooting silhouettes because I love to kind of drive my viewer's eye towards the shape of objects and just the form, and silhouettes do a really great job of doing that. And so I shoot a lot of silhouettes, and I was doing a review on the I think it was the 10S, and I was in Zanzibar, and I was trying to shoot the silhouette of a boat, and I was pulling the exposure all the way down, and the Smart HDR was so good that it was actually rendering those shadows. I had like a boat that was like sunlit from the back, harsh light, and I couldn't get the camera to underexpose the boat to the point that it was a shape. Instead, it just kept showing me the shadows, and so really made me realize how important it is to protect how the artist to give like lots of power and tools to people with that in the iPhone, but also to protect how we express ourselves as artists. And so we've seen a lot of improvement in that as well. I shot some silhouettes this year, and it looks, and I'm actually able to do that now.
That's kind of a funny problem, right? Because historically, cameras always gave you silhouettes when you had a harsh backlight. And now the iPhone's saying, "Oh, I'll fix that for you." And you're like, "Great, I appreciate that." But once in a while, artistically, I want a silhouette. And the iPhone's like, "No, you don't. We're going to fix that." And so you're fighting with the camera to get the picture. But you said in this latest version, you are able to get silhouettes out of that. Now, how do you pull that off with the current iPhone?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways now. But yeah, I think what you're talking about really highlights the values of the team, particularly the software team, but the entire team that's working on camera at Apple, and the very conscious and thoughtful effort towards not just creating a device with the most technical capability, but also like making sure that they protect and leverage that technical capability to enable the artist to express themselves. And I think maybe some of the other players in this field, that are making other devices, are a little bit more tuned towards like, let's just get as many megapixels as we can because we can, and it's all about maximum technology and less thoughtful towards the creative professional who cares about a lot more than just megapixels or amazing shadow rendering on HDRs or whatever. It's more about like, okay, like we achieve something fantastic technically, but it's maybe not the best thing for people who want to express themselves artistically, and finding that balance, that I'm sure that takes a lot of deep thought and a really tricky balance. But I think that's getting tuned in all the time with all these new technical capabilities and making sure that the artist is still protected in what they're trying to do. So anyway, the question that you asked was, sorry, I got off on a little rabbit trail there. What did you ask, David?
And saying, how did you pull off that silhouette image without HDR trying to fix it for you?
So there's two ways to do that this year. Traditionally, we would, for our exposure adjustment, we would just we would tap on whatever subject that we're looking to take a picture of. So in my case, it was the boat, and that will, pull focus on it and also pull exposure on it. But then if you tap and then you drag down, that would underexpose your image. And I find myself doing that quite a bit. I generally prefer shooting my pictures just like a notch or two darker than the iPhone's default preference. And so I used to do that all the time. And in like a scene like the Narrows, I would just be underexposing like 1,000 times a day, just tap, drag down, shoot, tap, drag down, shoot. And one of the really cool features that came out with this year was the ability to lock and remember exposure bias. So you could, if you go into your settings on your iPhone and go down to camera, you can select, I don't actually remember the exact language, but it's like remember exposure adjustment. When you do that, it will, and then you go back to your camera, you can, there's the drawer that you can swipe up on that's just above your shutter button. So if you're in your native camera app and you're looking at, you've got your different camera modes. It says photo and video and pano and time lapse and all that stuff. If you swipe up on that there, you've got a drawer where you've got some settings, and you'll see a plus and minus on the right side. And you can actually make exposure adjustments there that will be remembered. So I generally, for me, I keep that just darker by a couple of notches. In the photography world, we call it stops. So I might keep it down one stop, which is just like a negative 1.0, sometimes negative 0.7. And then that just tells your camera to always shoot the image a little bit darker than the iPhone is set by default. And then if in the case that you want, you can also you can use that to underexpose. So you could drag down 2 stops and just make that image really a lot darker. So those are 2 different ways to shoot. And you can also use both of those tools to shoot brighter. So in the case that your image may be a little bit too dark for your preferences, you can use both of those tools to brighten the image as well. But I use most often to create a silhouette, I'll use the first option that I mentioned, just tapping on the screen and dragging down.
This episode of Mac Power Users is brought to you by Squarespace. Go to squarespace.com/MPU and use the code MPU to get 10% off your first purchase. You can make your next big move with Squarespace because it lets you easily create a website for your next idea, project, or business. With unique domain name, award-winning templates that look great and are easy to use, and so much more. Think about what's on a modern website. It's not just static pages. You need to have video, and you need to maybe have a store or a portfolio or a blog or a podcast. Squarespace lets you do all of that stuff because it's an all-in-one platform. You have nothing to install on a server, no software patches to worry about, no upgrades are needed in the middle of the night. Squarespace has all of that covered. If you have any questions, they have award-winning 24/7 customer support that lets you quickly and easily grab a unique domain name, and those templates really are beautifully designed. I've used Squarespace for a wide range of projects over the years, And it's absolutely great. It's easy to build on, and you can hand it off to somebody and they can keep their content up to date very easily without fear of breaking anything. Squarespace plans start at just $12 a month, but you can start a trial with no credit card required by going to squarespace.com/MPU. When you decide to sign up, use the offer code MPU to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain name and to show your support for the show. Once again, that's squarespace.com/MPU and the code MPU to get 10% off your first purchase. Squarespace, make your next move, make your next website.
All right. You also got a chance to spend some time with the iPhone 12 Pro Max. And like we were talking about earlier, that is an iPhone that has a more substantial camera hardware than the standard 12 Pro. So I guess we should start there. Apple announced at the iPhone event that it's got this bigger sensor and a longer reach zoom. Can you talk about kind of your experience with those and how they're working?
Yeah, so when the iPhone 12 Pro Max became when they released that, the real big kind of hardware upgrades that we saw for the camera were one, a bigger sensor, a longer telephoto lens, and those were the two kind of major things. So the bigger sensor, what that basically means for us is that it's going to take better pictures in low light, and we might get a little bit of a shallower depth of field. It's kind of that more out of focus, like just maybe with one object in focus and other objects falling out of focus a little bit faster. So, but at the end of the day, it's really the bigger sensor is about better low light performance, less noise, and just more light collecting ability. And then the longer lens means we can punch in on things a little bit further away and get them bigger in our frame. So that where the 12 Pro has a telephoto lens that's a 4x zoom at 52 millimeters, the iPhone 12 Pro Max is 5x at 65 millimeters. So you've got a range on the 12 Pro Max from 13 millimeters all the way to 65 millimeters. And so that just means, it's not a massive difference when you look at them side by side, but it just means you're able to get a little bit closer. If you're shooting a picture of wildlife, or if you're shooting a portrait, or just a distant landscape or something like that, you've got a little bit more optical zoom that allows you to zoom in a little bit more and just get more of that in your frame. And I use the telephoto a ton when I'm shooting landscapes. A lot of times I see a composition that I really like, but it's, it's kind of far out there. And so I carry, right now, right next to me, I have a 800 millimeter lens that I'm using all the time. So I'm always seeing kind of in this very tight, different perspective. And so anywhere that I can, and that 800 millimeter lens, to be clear, is on a mirrorless camera, but I really appreciate the ability to punch in, and you see differently when you have different lenses at your capacity. And so as we get longer lenses like that, that's kind of it's cool to be able to go all the way from 13 millimeters. So I can kind of go on a hike like the Narrows, and I can see ultra wide. I can see these ultra wide perspectives that are a very different view, even if I'm standing in the exact same place, than the 65 millimeter. So one might give you a stronger sense of place. The ultra wide might just like really capture kind of everything around me, where the 65 millimeter like helps me punch in on one detail that I find interesting. So that's really what that zoom range means. And so, the 12 Pro Max from a hardware perspective definitely is rocking a lot, a couple of pretty substantial hardware upgrades. And, in truth, when I compared them, and I wrote about this, I didn't really see a huge difference between the 12 Pro and the 12 Pro Max, just in kind of normal everyday use. I kind of wonder how much remains to be seen in terms of how it's unlocked, whether that's with Pro Raw or just other software that we may see in the future. But I know they're laying the groundwork for. I have to believe that they're laying the groundwork for more more image creation ability with the new hardware. And so for me, everyone was asking me, should I go 12 Pro, 12 Pro Max? Is it worth it with all that hardware? And for me, it's really about screen size and battery life. If you like a bigger screen and want some more battery life, the 12 Pro Max is the way to go. And if not, if you like the smaller phone, the 12 Pro is really, really, really powerful too.
Yeah, they're both great, and they both have the same software stack. So you're going to get all that great software behind it. But you took one picture of your dog. By the way, you named your dog Mac.
Yeah.
Did you name your dog after the Mac?
Well, that's just been what I've wanted to name. I've wanted a golden for years and years. And my family, we've grown up with goldens, and this is actually the 9th golden in our family. But this is my very first one to have of my own with my wife. And I always, since I was a little kid, I was like, I'm going to get a golden someday and name him Mac. And
Well, there you go.
That's good. That's a good name.
You took a picture of him inside by candlelight, and in that one you could see a difference between the 12 Pro Max, the larger sensor, and I think for a lot of people who shoot pictures indoors, I don't know that it's enough of a reason to buy a Max camera, but you will get sharper pictures indoors.
Absolutely. And so that I write about this, but that image was really I designed that experiment around trying to create, looking for a side by side that would really leverage all of the new strengths in the Max. And so I wasn't on a tripod, which means it took advantage. We haven't talked about the new stabilization that the Max has, but it's got a new kind of sensor stabilization, and it's got better light collecting ability, and I shot it with a wide lens, which is faster. So anyway, all of those things, I really it really leveraged all of the best new hardware of the Max. And when you kind of stack all those things on top of each other in that type of environment, so that was maybe I can't recall exactly at the moment, but I think it was a 3-second exposure handheld, and it really did. You could definitely see a big difference. It was less noisy, which is thanks to the larger sensor and the larger pixel sizes. It was also sharper, which is thanks to the stabilization that it uses with the sensor shift technology. So yeah, hands down, when you zoom in and you look at a shot side by side in that type of environment, it's definitely a better picture.
Let's talk a little bit about the difference in the image stabilization. So this has been around on the iPhone for a number of years, but Apple seems to have really upped their game with the Max this time.
Yeah, so the way that we've seen stabilization provided to the iPhone cameras historically has been through optical image stabilization in the lens, so you've actually got like a gimbal type apparatus in the lens element itself. And this year they shifted to technology that we're more familiar with in the mirrorless and DSLR world. That's more of a sensor shift or in-body camera stabilization. And basically what that's doing is it's moving your sensor, I think it's like 5,000 times a second, adjusting it to stabilize. So instead of stabilizing the lens, you're stabilizing in the sensor. And that provides some interesting advantages. There's that jello effect that we've seen probably if you've been shooting video while in a bumpy car or maybe in an airplane or something like that. And so that's often often correlated with the optical image stabilization in the lens. The sensor shift technology is a lot better for that. You can also make a lot more adjustments per second. So there's those really high vibration environments, like if you're on a 4-wheeler or any sort of platform that's just shaking a lot, the IBIS or the sensor shift is going to do a lot better job at stabilizing for that. And I think it also is just going to be overall more durable.
Is that something that you see coming to other iPhones in the future, or is this an issue that they've really needed the bigger phone to pull that off, you think?
I would imagine we're going to see it eventually. I think at the end of the day, all of this stuff is about helping people with iPhones take pictures that enrich their lives. And this is a technology we see in the flagship model today, and I would imagine pending how it's received and how it improves people's pictures with the Max this year, I sure wouldn't be surprised to see it rolled out across the whole iPhone line, because it will really help people take better pictures.
I've always felt the iPhone's real good at stabilizing video. A lot of times as humans, we walk around and move while we shoot video. And historically, when, cameras first got the ability to shoot video, that was really bumpy. And the iPhone has seemed to stabilize that. Were there any improvements this year for stabilization for video as well?
I can't say that I tested a bunch side by side for that. But like you said, the iPhone does do a really good job of stabilizing video. And I always have such a long list of things I wanna test, and such limited time on these reviews. So that was one of those things that I had on the maybe list, and I just didn't get around to. But yeah, I've always had fun, and especially when you stack the software, the hardware stabilization with unique software like Hyperlapse historically, and other apps that allow you to get some really cool stabilized effects. You can get these really dreamy, magical looking moving motion shots that are just super stable. And yeah, so I'm curious to see what the filmmaking community does with the Max this year with some of these new technologies.
And it's all on a camera that fits in your pocket. That's the crazy part, right?
Yeah, continually getting crazier, right? Every year it's like, wow, this thing's just with me all the time.
Now, you were talking earlier about just the camera controls, and I think this is something a lot of users miss, and I don't know why Apple does it this way, but if you want to change the camera settings, you go into the settings app on your iPhone, and there's a separate cameras kind of settings in the settings app. And I think a lot of people just don't realize it's there. And that's where you can really kind of dial in to make the camera work the way you want. You had already talked about the locked exposure adjustment that you were using through that setting. Are there any others in there of note this year?
There's really they're always releasing new controls in there. And so I always advise, when you get your new iPhone, if you take a lot of pictures, definitely open up settings, go to camera, and just scroll through in there and see what's possible. It's kind of like reading your camera manual, which I always do. But you can kind of learn things. You end up learning new possibilities, and there's a nice little description under a lot of the different settings that kind of explain why it's there. And a lot of times it's like, oh, that's cool. I've had that problem. I wished before I could turn that on or off. And so I always advise that. But yeah, this year we got the exposure adjustment, which I jumped into a little earlier. The ability to lock our exposure adjustment and keep it the same. And then there's a couple other things too. Last year, we gained the feature to actually recover the image that was outside of our frame. So if I was shooting with my 1x lens, it would actually show me what the 0.5x, the ultra wide, was seeing outside of my frame, and it would capture that data. So when I'm trying to crop or correct the perspective, it could pull in that data that was also captured by the ultra wide. It's a really cool feature overall. And again, kind of this camera living by a different set of rules than a traditional camera, because we haven't been able to do that with traditional pro cameras. But the way it was integrated in the UI, I found to be a little distracting when I was trying to frame an image, and I was seeing things outside of my frame. So long story short, we can turn that feature off now when we want to, if we're being really meticulous about our composition. So that was one of them that's in there that you can turn off now. And another one that I was really happy to see come back in iOS 14 was just being able to use the volume button to activate burst. I actually use that feature quite a bit. I'll one-handed operate my phone and get it down close to the ground or something, and then shoot a burst as a skateboarder jumps over me or something like that. And that we lost that ability last year. They instead it got the volume buttons got reprogrammed to record video, which was also a cool feature. Maybe more people use it for that, but for me, I really like the burst, and so we got the ability back to use our volume up for burst.
Hey, can I just insert one there, a plea for burst mode? If you take pictures of kids, especially little kids, burst mode is your friend, because kids never smile if you take one picture, but if you shoot like 30 of them, one of them will be golden. I don't know, I don't know why everybody doesn't use that feature more.
I'm a huge fan of burst, and I think it's underrated because, like what you said, I think it's important to note that when you burst, you get a slightly different quality of image in terms of how it renders some of the HDR effects and some of the highlights and shadows. But so it may not be quite as robust in terms of how the camera can render all the image, but it still looks really, really great. And I would way rather have the absolute perfect moment with really great light than the wrong moment with the best light. And I think that's really important. I think not enough photographers, especially people getting started and hobbyists, they don't typically prioritize timing as much as some of the other aspects of creating a great image, and timing is everything, especially if you're shooting if you're photographing your kids or anything else that's moving. A lot of times what matters more than anything is that perfect expression that you saw but you didn't capture, or that perfect moment where the skateboarders at the absolute top of their jump, or whatever that is. And so shooting a burst, I shoot thousands and thousands of images via burst, and then toss the ones that don't work and keep the image that does work. And I think that's kind of one of my little iPhone camera secrets is always leveraging burst mode to capture the perfect moment.
And just real quick, what's your workflow for dealing with tossing the ones you don't want?
Well, the easiest way is to review them on your iPhone and select your favorites, and then when you say you're done, it asks you, do you want me to just keep the ones that you favorited, or do you want me to keep everything? And if you just say keep the ones you favorited, then it just tosses the other ones that right then and there.
Yeah, that's absolutely the best way to do it, because you can really create a job for yourself once you start, collecting all of those.
Yeah, for sure. So, and if you do it the other way, bringing it into Photos, you can sort your shots by burst. Photos on the Mac, the Photos app on the Mac, has some really great tools that are really helpful for sorting and organizing your iPhone photos, and it makes it really easy to see your bursts and your panos and all that stuff. And you can take care of it there, but I like taking care of it on my phone.
Any other settings people should be keeping an eye out for?
Yeah, there's a couple other things in there. There's prioritize faster shooting, which is it's actually kind of in there based around the same values I was just talking about. If you want to get the perfect moment, and you're just kind of tapping your shutter over and over, let's say you're not bursting, but you're wanting to take a few shots or several shots in a couple of seconds. Sometimes because the iPhone is doing so much computationally, it can get slowed down a touch if you're shooting a bunch of images by tapping your shutter over and over. And prioritize faster shooting is it will give up just a little bit of what it's doing computationally for image quality to give you the perfect moment. So that's kind of lined up with what I was talking about with burst, and I leave that on. And then there's other things that we saw in the software in there. I don't remember everything. There's always new things that they add, but I would very much encourage you to get in there and poke around and kind of turn those things on and off and experiment for yourself to see how they impact you and your style as a photographer.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by Indeed. Go to Indeed.com/MPU to get a free $75 credit to boost your job post. 2020 has already reshaped how we work, and businesses across the globe are being challenged to be their most efficient, which means every hire is more important than ever. Indeed is here to help. Indeed is the #1 job site in the world with more total visitors than any other job site, according to ComScore. Indeed helps you find quality candidates quickly so you can focus on hiring the person you need to keep your business going. Unlike other sites, Indeed gives you full control and payment flexibility over your hiring. You only pay for what you need. You can pause your account at any time, and there are no long term contracts. And now Indeed's new way of matching you with candidates instantly delivers a short list of quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed match your job criteria that you can contact the moment you sponsor a job, making Indeed the only job site that can move as fast as you do. 73% of online job seekers in the U.S. visit Indeed each month, according to ComScore. Indeed can help you get the quality hire you need. That's why more than 3 million businesses worldwide use Indeed for hiring. Right now, Indeed is offering our listeners a free $75 credit to boost your job post, which means more quality candidates will see it fast. Try Indeed out with a free $75 credit at Indeed.com/MPU. This is their best offer available anywhere. Go right now to Indeed.com/MPU. This offer is valid through December 31, so act now. Terms and conditions apply. Our thanks to Indeed for their support of the Mac Power users and all of Relay FM.
So, Austin, we've talked a lot about things that people can pick up to improve their iPhone photography. Are there any tips we haven't made to yet that you always make sure to share with people?
Man, yeah, I think first and foremost, it's getting to know your camera. That's what we were kind of talking about before. Get out and experiment when it doesn't matter as much. Just take an afternoon or a sunset or whatever to go out and just have fun with it and just shoot a lot and kind of learn what it's really great at and how to kind of leverage those strengths and what you like about it. And the last thing that you want is to be out there when everybody's looking at you for a perfect group shot or when the light's really epic on your hike that you finally took to the Narrows with your sister and you don't know what's going on with your camera or how to make the most of it. The iPhone is so powerful and it's really easy to use, but there's also a lot of just underlying kind of hidden power in there that you'll discover if you familiarize yourself with it. So first and foremost, I would say just get out there and shoot with it and learn about it and how it works and how it thinks. And just general photography advice, I always advise just to shoot a ton, shoot every day. And I think if you're interested in becoming a photographer or just better shaping your work, just assign yourself the task of going out and shooting just once a day for a week. And I think you'll be really proud of what comes out of that. You'll find some interesting images. You'll learn more about your camera and you'll have a lot of fun. And that's how you kind of start to shape your voice as a photographer, whether you're doing it as a hobbyist just for fun or if you're pursuing a professional career. And I think really being thoughtful about your subject is important. If you want to create a portrait of somebody, first make sure you connect with that person. And if we take portraits because we want to share an image that people connect to. And if you don't connect to your subject, how can we possibly expect your audience to connect to your subject? So I think a lot of times we jump past some of these basics that apply to you, no matter whether you're shooting with an iPhone or a traditional camera. And so think a lot about that, and knowing the better you know your subject, the better you're going to create, the better image you're going to create. And then more iPhone specific things. I generally am always using my my iPhone native camera app just because I'm always trying to play to the strengths of the iPhone, and I think one of the greatest strengths of the iPhone is how fast and nimble it is, and just the ability to pull out your camera really, really quickly is really important in iPhone photography. So I think if you do play with other apps, I really love Halide. That'll give you a little bit more manual control. HALIDE. They just came out with a Mark II version of their camera, and it's fantastic. It's got a great user experience, and the team over there has done a really great job and providing a lot more manual control while still keeping the interface really clean. And if you do use it, you can create a little shortcut to quickly pull it up, whether if you want to say to Siri, just camera or shoot mode or something like that. And she can, using a shortcut, an iOS shortcut, that can pull up your camera app. If not, you can also put Halide. You can also use like the double tap feature to launch a shortcut. So that was something that we got this year, was the double tap and triple tap, where you can tap the back of your phone twice and it'll run a shortcut. So if you wanted, that's a really a great way to be able to utilize something like Halide as another camera app and be able to really quickly access it. I think though that and I shoot with both. I shoot a ton with the native camera app. Just I really like to be able to switch between the different modes and the stability and just the speed to access it. But I also pull out Halide when I want more meticulous and manual control. And then I love using my iPhone as a remote, my watch to remotely control my iPhone. We've had that feature for a while, but I feel like a lot of people still don't use that. So whether it's just a self-portrait. The other day, Esther and I celebrated our anniversary, and we set up the iPhone on a little tripod, and I triggered it with my watch, and that's just a great way to. It's really nice to have that remote capture ability, and you can also experiment with it creatively and set up your camera out in the yard and get a picture of a squirrel or maybe some other interesting wildlife, things like that. So I think just keeping a spirit of experimentation and kind of knowing all these different technical abilities and possibilities and experimenting them and with them in different fun ways is important. And just knowing, that every image that you see from, at least from me, and I think generally from any photographer, you're seeing one of 10,000. There's so many experiments and miniature failures behind the scenes that happen behind every great image. So I just want to encourage you as you play with your camera not to lose heart because your images don't look like the ones you see on Instagram, because those are all edited and those are all a product of, relentless endurance to create a vision. It's not easy. It doesn't just happen on its own. And so play a lot with the iPhone and experiment and have fun with it. It's a really magical device, and I think as long as you're having a blast with it, that's what matters.
Well, you did one thing in this year's review that I didn't think was possible with an iPhone, and that's astrophotography. You took pictures of the universe. With that little lens, and tell me, how did you do that?
Yeah, so that's something that we've really seen emerge this year, is the ability to actually capture the stars in a beautiful way. And so with the Max's larger sensor primarily, and night mode in the software, I was able to take the Max, I put it on a tripod. I got to a very dark sky environment, which is a really important part of astrophotography. So what I mean by that is you can actually Google dark sky finder, and you'll see a couple different websites that show you the darkest skies in the world. And that just means, the least light pollution. And so places like the Grand Canyon and Zion or Mojave Desert, those are some of the darkest skies. I think the darkest in America is in Big Bend National Park in Texas. But go to so I was in a dark sky environment, which is helpful. And when you're at elevation, that's also helpful. So then I point the camera, the iPhone 12 Pro Max up at the sky, and then switch into night mode max. So that just to recap on that's the slider just above your shutter button when you're in night mode, and it'll say something like auto 3 seconds or 5 seconds or 10 seconds, but you can slide that over and you can go to max, which is when you're shooting stars, it's usually going to be 30 seconds. And So yeah, just point it up and hit the shutter, and don't shake the camera while it's shooting, and out comes a beautiful a beautiful shot of the Milky Way, which is pretty amazing, really. There's so much historically. I've been passionate about shooting the stars for years and years, and it takes a lot of technical capacity to do that. You've got to have fast lenses, and you've got to really know what you're doing in terms of how to expose it, setting your ISO and your aperture and all these different things, and so the fact now that anybody can get their iPhone and a little $30 tripod, or even just prop up their camera with no tripod and point it up at the sky and get a great shot of the stars is nuts. And I just can't wait to see what everybody does with this year's round of iPhones and astrophotography.
So you've talked about tripods a few times on the show. What is some basic accessory somebody should get if they want to, kind of up their game with their iPhone or mobile photography?
Yeah, so I think when you are shooting with your iPhone, I think it's really important that you don't jeopardize its strengths. I've talked about this a little bit, but one of its greatest strengths is it's nimble and it fits in your pocket. And the second you start getting a kit that's so big you can't carry it with you anywhere, then you kind of lose one of the greatest powers of the iPhone, which is it's simple. It's very simple and easy to carry with you. So whenever I'm getting accessories for the iPhone, I'm always keeping that in mind. I want it to be really nimble and agile. I want to be able to easily keep it with me. So for a tripod, I'm a huge fan of the UltraPod 2 from Pedco. You can get them on Amazon. And then that's just the tripod itself. It's plastic. It's got a little Velcro strap on it, so you can strap it to like a fence post or to just basically strap it to anything. But that doesn't come with an iPhone mount. And I'm a big fan of Studio Neat's Glyph. That has it's got a quick release on it that makes it really easy to mount the iPhone on the tripod, and also to pull it off when you want to. So I use the UltraPod 2 in combination with the Studio Neat Glyph. And then other accessories that I find are important. A battery bank is something that you use a lot, especially if you're shooting these long exposures and of the stars. Yeah, that will start chewing up your battery a little bit faster than normal use. And so having a great battery bank is important. If you're shooting a really long time lapse, I have a solar powered battery bank that I mount to my tripod. And then for a bigger tripod, so I talked about a tabletop tripod a second ago, the UltraPod 2. But for a bigger tripod, I'm a huge fan of Peak Design's travel tripod, which is super compact, but still a traditional full-size tripod and really well designed. And it comes with an iPhone mount as well, which is really nice. And so that's a great great kind of camera, a passionate iPhone photographer's tool. And you can also mount traditional cameras on that as well. Let's see, other accessories. I always carry a lens cloth with me, and I do experiment with some different microphones and different lights and things, but I don't think you need to get into much of that unless you're really shooting for production. So I think keeping it simple and lightweight. I used to use a lot of add-on lenses too, but now with the ability to shoot everything from 13 millimeters to 65 millimeters built into the iPhone, I just don't. I don't really carry the lenses so much anymore, and you do get a little bit better quality if you pick up a Moment lens and want to use their telephoto or their ultra wide, and it might be able to collect light a little bit better and things. But for me, the trade-off, I just really like to keep it nimble and agile, and I love using the lenses built into the iPhone.
All right, let's say that you get a call tomorrow from Tim Cook, and he says, "Hey, Austin, I love your reviews. I've decided I want to make you the boss of the iPhone. So I need you to come to Apple. You're in charge of the hardware, the software stack, the whole thing. What would you do?"
Man, let me think about that for a second. I think I would, I'd probably keep everybody in place and say, you guys are doing a great job. And I'm going to go out and take some pictures and give you some feedback. But give a double thumbs up. And I would I think I would encourage the team to continue protecting how the artist expresses themselves. I think that's a really important aspect of that they're doing now, and I think it's something that separates the iPhone camera from a lot of other cameras in the industry. And I would really push into the raw capabilities that we're starting to see there. I think that's a major factor in the future of iPhone photography is pro raw. And I think that the limitations that I see that I think they continue to improve on, but the primary reasons that I will reach for my traditional larger camera is low light, which we've seen huge improvements on. Another reason is the longer telephoto capacity, which we saw an improvement on again this year. And so both of those things, I think we need to continue pushing in. And I hope that we see that the Apple team continues to push into to both of those capabilities. And that's something I would definitely encourage. And I would improve the photos experience on the Mac and get a tighter integration for that and between the iPhone camera and the Mac OS photos. I think there's some nice integrations there, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to be had there and a lot of power to be unlocked in our photos with a good pairing between photos on Mac and on the iOS.
Do you have a sense of how that works at Apple now? You mentioned, that you're happy that they are preserving the artist intent with these cameras. I know that Apple has the Pro Workflow team and they have, creative people embedded all throughout the company. But do you have the sense that this camera system is built by photographers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I know for a fact that there's a handful of really talented photographers that are working on the iPhone camera, that really understand this stuff. And I also know they do a really great job of listening to the pro community, to really understand what about this is working really well and what's not working really well. And they take that feedback and are really thoughtful about it. And I think we can see the results of that. I think a lot of times we see it in the camera software controls, like I was talking about earlier, the exposure adjustment stuff and the prioritize faster shooting. And I think they really are thoughtful about understanding what artists and creative professionals actually want, and they're finding different ways to integrate it. And that I think is one of the really challenging things to balance, because the way that I might think as a traditional photographer, what I might think solves a problem, it could be completely different than how they actually solve the problem. Because, I might think how a traditional camera works, but they might think how software could solve that problem. And so I know that they have to be very thoughtful about what is the actual issue here and what are all the tools that we have at our capacity to solve this. And so, I'm always encouraged by those improvements. And, I know it takes a lot of time and a lot of collaboration from teams across the board in hardware and software and to make those things happen. But I'm always encouraged to see each year how the fruit of that kind of thoughtful listening from the creative pro community.
This episode of Mac Power Users is brought to you by Woven, the all-in-one calendar perfect for busy people. Go to woven.com or click the link in the show notes for a free 21-day trial. If my calendar is out of sorts, I really feel out of sorts. I depend on it day in and day out to know what's coming up, what I need to plan for. And feeling disorganized really impacts my work. Woven syncs all of your calendars in one place to help you get over this feeling. You can bring in your Google, G Suite, and Microsoft 365 accounts so you can see all of your time, both personal and professional, something that's really important in 2020, as a lot of us have seen intermingling of those things. Woven builds scheduling links directly into your calendar so you can use them to schedule meetings, one-off links send to people. You can quickly block your time, using Woven's smart templates so you can easily plan your perfect week. Woven also has built-in analytics so you can easily calculate where you spend your time so you can make time for what matters most. Check this out to take control of your calendar and improve your workflow. And as a listener of Mac Power Users, you can try Woven free for 21 days. Go to woven.com or click the link in the show notes. That's Woven, WOVEN.com. Our thanks to Woven for supporting Mac Power Users and Relay FM. So one feature that we have at a time of recording, it's in beta but not rolled out yet, is Pro RAW. Can you explain the difference between RAW and regular shooting on the iPhones, and have you had any experience with it yet?
Yeah, so we've talked a lot today about computational photography and how all these algorithms and all of these decisions that are being made by the hardware or the software and hardware inside of your iPhone every time you take a picture, and it's like millions and millions of like tiny adjustments are being made and stacking of all these different kind of layers of your image, and so that all is ultimately is why we can just point our camera at virtually anything and capture it, whether it's a portrait of a moving dog in front of us or the stars. The computer inside our iPhone, the computations happening inside of our iPhone are handling it all. And so that's one of the iPhone's greatest powers. And then on the flip side, you've got in traditional camera thinking, you've got RAW files, which when I take a picture with a traditional camera, it spits out a RAW file, and that basically lets me make all the decisions, not all the same decisions, but most of my decisions myself in post. I can open it up into Photoshop or Lightroom or some RAW software and decide what I want to do with the highlights and the shadows and the contrast and all these different things. So I have full control to make these decisions on a large on my Pro Display XDR later, whatever display, and that gives me full control. So that's RAW is all about giving me full control as the artist, and the iPhone traditionally has put out a file that it's made all those decisions for you, and it looks really good right there in that moment. And so both have their pros and cons, and Pro RAW is kind of the blending of both of those worlds that Apple's released this year, and it's giving you it's still kind of leveraging some of these unique powers of the iPhone and its ability to make decisions on the fly, but it's giving us control to change some of those things later. And so instead of baking those decisions into the file like traditional JPEG would, we're getting a DNG file, which is a RAW format, and it allows us to change a lot of those things later. And it also RAW has some other advantages as well. You've got more dynamic range in the file. You've got significantly larger file sizes, so you've got a lot more data that's in that file, and you get to make those decisions of how the image is rendered later. So yeah, it's not out yet, and so I haven't had a ton of experience with it. I have played a little bit with the beta and shot some pictures of the stars and made some adjustments. And like one of the things I noticed at the just at the beginning of kind of comparing was it seemed like in low light photos, the iPhone traditionally applies a good bit of noise reduction to smooth things out and keep it looking sharp and smooth with less grain. And when I shot it in RAW, it gave me an image that was had less noise reduction had been applied, which actually helped when I was editing the stars. It helped to keep the stars nice and sharp and crisp like I wanted them. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to experiment more with RAW, to play with it more and see how powerful it is. And, it's really a feature that's targeted towards the pros, towards people that are not perfectly happy with the image that comes straight out of their iPhone and want to have a little bit more control in some of these extreme environments. And again, we just touched on this, but I think it's a feature that lends itself to listening to the creative professionals and bringing out something that gives the creative community what we're asking for. And I never even thought about Pro Raw. Well, how you blend both of these things, this great power of computational photography and the control that I want later. And Apple's answer to that is Pro Raw.
Yeah, I don't know what to think of it either, but I the idea of having your cake and eat it too sounds really, sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I think things like Smart HDR and other things, sometimes if you see an image that doesn't look quite right for you, for your preferences, you can open it up in Pro Raw and you can make some adjustments to things later and make it just right.
So, Austin, we spent a lot of time today talking about the camera app and photos, but what are some of your other favorite apps and services you use to pull all this off that people may not be aware of?
Man, there's so much behind the scenes. I'm working on a setup right now. Just or an article on my mobile creative workflow for 2020 because there's just so many different things that I'm using to make it all come together. But I use my 16-inch MacBook Pro. It's at the center of everything that I do in my creative workflow when I'm on the road, and then when I'm back home, I connect it to the Pro Display XDR, and I actually find the 16-inch MacBook Pro is I don't really need a desktop. It's fast enough for me, even when I'm processing my huge 100 megapixel Hasselblad files, and so I just love, and then with the 8 terabytes of internal storage, it's awesome to use for to store all my image archive with me and take it with me everywhere. So I don't really use a desktop computer anymore. I just connect it to my XDR and display, and then when I'm not, I love I use little hard drives when whenever I dump my images, whether from my iPhone or other cameras, I'm dump into 2 separate hard drives. So I use my little LaCie drives that are super fast solid state drives, and really like those. And yeah, what other tools? Let's see. We're going to talk about Airstream here in a little bit, which is a part of my creative workflow. But other apps, I mentioned Halide. I love using tools like PhotoPills. It's an iOS app, PhotoPills, and it helps me plan around light. And so sunset and sunrise times, and same thing with the moon, and gives me it helps me plan when I'm going to be where. And that's a big part of creating a lot of the images that you see is just planning around light. And I use dark sky to plan around weather, just for hourly forecasts. That's an important part of my workflow. And then I use Lightroom on iOS and Lightroom CC on the Mac to keep my image library in the cloud, and to share my images with clients. And I love Lightroom. It's gotten quite a bit better, the mobile version, and it's also great for processing the raw files, the Pro Raw files that the iPhone is spitting out. And yeah, that's a few things off the top of my head.
All right. Well, gang, I want to thank Austin for coming in. On More Power Users, we're going to talk about how you're pulling all this off out of your Airstream. But for now, I would recommend heading over to austinmann.com, AUSTINMANN. There's 2 N's.com. He's got a traveler's guide to iPhone photography if you go sign up, and it is definitely worth your time. And you can see all these amazing reviews you've done and these great locations you've gone to. And honestly, Austin, every year I look forward to this review that you do of the iPhone camera system. And thanks for taking all the time and effort to making this for us.
Yeah, of course. It's always such a thrill for me to play with the new capabilities of the iPhone, and to get to share it with this community of what's possible now at these new tools that we have on our iPhone camera. And yeah, I love doing it, and it's always great to hear your feedback. And yeah, as David said, I've got some resources for photographers that are looking for more to refine their skills as photographers. Some that are free and some that are paid training resources. And so check them out on my website. And I'm happy to be here, and thanks for listening.
All right, we are the Mac Power Users. You can find us over at relay.fm/MPU. Thank you to our sponsors today, Smile, Squarespace, Indeed, and Woven, and we'll see you next week.